Okay. Right. So hello everybody. The person to my left on the screen, but not physically. Well, actually looks like we could be in the same room, but we're clearly not. Is
It does.
Dino? It looks
It
like we're in
does
the
actually.
same room.
It,
Oh dear. So anyway, this is Dino, who you probably met the video that we did in the Crystal Palace the other week. There was a bit of background noise, but I think we waded through that. So in that, Dino talked about his witnessy, how he became a witness, why he left the witnesses, and also how me and him knew each other. And they were also talking about some of our karting experiences. I in the video I did say I don't know if I did it in it was a video or not, but I did say how long you've been the karting for. So how long have you been kart busting for again?
say it's about 2 years, just over 2 years.
Yeah,
As I say, kind of really coincided with the time I was working up in Edinburgh.
right.
But you know, 2 years or
Right. So
so.
about 2 years, because I can think about when I first approached any Carters, and it was actually 7 years ago. And I remember I met them in a place called Gretna, not Gretna Green, out near a bank I was going to go into, and I passed them, and it's the first time I ever saw them, and I just thought to myself, what is going on here? As literally people just walked past and they never spoke to anybody. And then I tried the same stunt myself and they spoke to me. So eventually I just thought, I've got to say something because they're not going to speak to me. But that was before I was doing videos. And then I remember seeing I spoke to more Carters in Annan, but the very first video I ever did about speaking to Carters was actually 6 years ago. And that was when I was in Sevilla. And that was, I don't know if you remember it, but it was the infamous incident where Tony Morris had been caught on a Sunday in a hard liquor store buying a expensive bottle of single malt whiskey. So I'd screen grabbed that. And when I was in Sevilla, and I had it on my phone, and I just saw a couple of the carters there, and of course I was bursting to ask them, not knowing if they could understand English, did they recognise who this was? I just going over, and one of them was American, I believe, and she could understand me, and that was the first video I did about it. Yeah, and of course, subsequently, I've done a few more. Anyway, you got a few all things that you want to discuss anyway. So I'm just going to comment as you wade in here with what you'd like to say. We should get this wrapped up by 8:45 in our time, so that's half an hour. So take it away, Dino.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Terry. I was just going to say, first of all, it's not just the witnesses I've been speaking to. I've actually approached others in the street, in Ayr and in Glasgow. Actually, I met the same people in Ayr, High Street, and then met them again in Buchanan Street in Glasgow. A group of Adventists who are there with a table and they have all their books and such like. So I thought, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be fair just to speak to the witnesses and not to others. So I've approached them and started speaking to them,
Yeah.
and challenging them on some of their thinking,
Okay.
and some born again Christians that were in the air. I've been approached by various Christian groups as well, and I'll stand and talk to them and question some of their beliefs as well. And of course, Mormons as well have been approached in the street, but the same Mormon sister twice in Italy. Um, so I
Think you
speak
say
to,
that. Funny, just the other day, two Mormon girls walked past on the bridge in Dumfries, and my wife said, There's two Mormon girls," and I went, "What did the girls do this as well?" So you've just confirmed that they do it as well.
yeah, absolutely, and approaching you in the street, and spoke to one, and she basically said that the Mormon Church send them across there at their own expense, and they've got to pay for their own way while they're here. Just
Wow.
really young girls, and
Yeah,
basically they're
yeah.
not financially supported. I'm thinking, crikey, you really, and they've got to pay their own way back. And I thought, crikey, that your church isn't even supporting you, But anyway, so speak to all sorts. Now, I was just thinking after our last chat, one of the things that I wanted to point out was quite meaningful to me, and I was just wondering if this applies to yourself and maybe some others that are watching this video. When I was working in the civil service, they sent all their staff on a training course, and they got some private company that did sort of psychology training and such like, and they did personality profiling, and they
Okay.
basically were explaining to us, particularly for managers, how to identify the different types of people that we all, the different categories of people that we fall into. So when you're managing a team of people, some people are going to be a particular type of person and others are going to be in another group. So you can't give the same information to all these different people and different types in the same way. You've got to categorize it to a way that they'll be able to accept it. So there was about four different personality groups. Can't remember them all, but two of them basically we could remember it by the fact that you talk about Kirk or Spock if you're a Star Trek fan. Spock being very logical, um,
Mm.
whereas Kirk was very emotional, very human, and it showed you those
Yes.
two different types of characteristics in people. And I remember going through this chap that was doing the course, and we sat down individually, and he was taking me through the results. So what they do, they have you fill out these questionnaires, and depending on how you answer certain questions, you're basically showing your preferences, and they can work out your personality profile. And basically, well, I was a Spock. I was all reason and logic, facts and figures sort of thing. But
Okay.
it made me aware when he was going through it all with me. Um, I suddenly realised, and up until this, I wasn't going to meetings at this point, but I always used to wonder, why is it me that left and not all these others? Why is it us few that left? And it made
Yeah.
me realise it's because of the type of personality that we are. It's like when we took going to the Kingdom Hall, because we weren't brought up in it, we had to make a logical, reasonable decision. We had to examine what they were teaching us, um, and to accept it intellectually. So we used our intellect and reason to accept what we thought was the truth at that time. But by the
Okay.
same token, because of that personality type, that nature to want to know, um, the proofs, the facts, the figures, the intellectual aspect of it, it's that same thing that took us into the congregation that probably took us out. It's because we wouldn't be satisfied with just been listening to what we were told and just accepting it. We had
That's a
to
good point.
reason on it and accept it logically, reasonably.
Yeah.
So it made
Yeah.
me realize that for the very first time, that's why I went into the witnesses and that's why I came
And
out,
you came out. Yeah.
you know.
Okay.
So just I
Makes
thought maybe
sense.
others think the same way. And just while I remember, I'd just like to raise a toast to the new understanding just released by the governing body. So a toast to
Yeah.
you lights
You shite.
and a quick experience on that. Been to many a
Uh,
wedding where a toast was made and you had to kind of stand silently and hope nobody noticed. But
yeah.
about a year before I moved up to Rutherglen, I was dating a sister in Ayr, and she worked in a shop and got invited to the wedding of one of her shopmates, just to the reception. So she took me along as a partner, and we get to the venue, and the bride and groom are actually meeting all the guests that are coming in for the reception, which was unusual. And so they were sort of lined up, and we had to sort of meet them as we were going in. And I think it was either the best man or the mother of the bride. She had a tray with drinks on it. And as we're going in, she says, "Would you like to take a drink and make a toast to the bride and groom?" And we just looked at each other because we couldn't do it, and we just had to make it some
All right. All
embarrassing
right.
excuse to
I
move past
forgot
them
about
up and
that.
down. And
Yeah,
just,
I forgot about that.
but now we know. Well, toast is, it means nothing now, we could have done, but the embarrassing positions you were put in with these silly
Wow.
um, bans on various things. Um, Another thing I was thinking about, I was looking at some of the JW.org recently. I was just checking up some information, and it occurred to me, see, in our day, we rarely saw the governing body members. You maybe occasionally get a photograph of them in a magazine, but you, I think anybody would be hard pushed to mention all the names of the governing body back in the
Yeah.
80s when
Yeah.
we came in.
Yeah.
And you really saw them. Although at one convention, I think it was '84, Brother Schroeder came. And I don't know if you remember, he gave a special talk.
Yeah. Bert Schroeder.
And Bert Schroeder,
Yeah.
Albert
You
Schroeder.
liked him, didn't you? You liked him, didn't you?
No, no, no. Can you remember we were in the Murrayfield grounds, and it was actually Ian's mum came up to the two of us, and she was
Yeah.
gushing about this Brother Schroeder's talk, the governing body member. And
Yeah.
what did you think of the talk? It was great, wasn't it? And you and me just looked at each other. We both thought it was terrible. He was
Yeah.
awful. He was an awful speaker. He was reading from a
It was.
script.
Yeah, it's bad.
But it was like you just had to kind of go, oh, the governing body are wonderful and all that. And it was terrible. But it just
Yeah.
made me think that, I mean, that was a rare thing. Whereas nowadays, it seems to be it's only the governing body members that seem to do any preaching. Their videos, and it's preaching to the witnesses, but they seem to be doing all the talking. Whereas all these brothers and sisters standing at carts, it's like they're just billboards. It's like the old days in Russell's day when they used to walk down the street with their, what do they call them? It's not cheese boards, what do they call them? The billboard things, the strap round them
Aye.
with
Aye.
slogans. So they weren't there to talk to anybody. They were just there to have these
Yeah.
signs and pass out these slogans. And it just kind of made me think, the experience that we've had so far, they really don't want to talk. They don't want to be questioned. They don't want to say much at all. They just direct you. Anything you ask them, they just direct you to jw.org.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
just wondering whether it's like it's drummed into them. If people go to jw.org, it's the governing body members with their videos and such like that they can see. They'll do all the talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the witness in the street isn't being relied upon to do any preaching, any talking, you know?
Yes.
Just a thought that occurred. Um, and another thing I thought would be interesting in light of our last experience at Queen Street with Brother
Sending.
condescending. Um,
Oh.
it reminded me of an instance once I was preaching, doing the
You're
ministry in
preaching.
a, in a wee village in Ayrshire, and we get invited in by, it was a family, a brethren family, which was quite
Oh.
unusual to me. But they had us in, and we're sitting talking. And this woman, brethren woman, said to me was, you're not Bible students. I said, well, we are. And she says, no, you're students of the Watchtower, because you're always talking about the Watchtower. And if I ask you a question, you say, well, it says here in the Watchtower. And I remember at the time thinking, that was a bit kind of harsh, but as time has gone on, I've suddenly realised she was right. The brethren
Mm.
woman was right. But the
Yeah.
witnesses are students. They study the Watchtower. They don't study the Bible. Because Brother Condescending's example, when he said to us about the new light, and we said to him, well, what scripture are you paraphrasing?
Yeah.
And he didn't know.
Didn't know.
And, but the thing is, the Watchtower's always quoting that phrase and it's always quoting that scripture. So they'll have
Yeah.
seen it many a times. Or if they're in a meeting as a public talk and their brother quotes it, he might well give the scriptural reference, Proverbs 4:18. But for all that, he still didn't know it or couldn't remember
Mm.
it. They
Mm.
just quote the paraphrase without the. So in other words, they haven't actually studied the verse. And most
Yeah.
importantly, as we pointed out to that brother, even if they have read the verse on occasion, they've never read the context.
Context,
So
yeah.
they've never read what that scripture is saying in its context to understand the actual part of the chapter or the book that they're reading from. They've been basically told a meaning to apply to that scripture by the Watchtower, rather than actually reading the Bible, reading the context and finding out what the understanding of that verse is from the Bible itself, you know?
Mhm.
So he was obviously embarrassed, and quite rightly. But I think it's good to kind of point these things out to them, because it's planting a seed in their mind. Because the next time that brother's in a meeting or reading a magazine and it quotes that, he's going to think of us, and
Yeah,
he's going to think, Dino and Teddy told me that that's not what that, and he's going to go to that. And he's going to, he refused to read the context, if you remember. He just read the verse. And I
yeah,
kept saying to him,
yeah,
read the whole context out. And he wouldn't read it out.
yeah.
But at some point, he's going to read that and he's going to read the context, you know? So it's planting seeds, I think, with them to try and make them think, not to just paraphrase, parrot scriptures,
Yeah.
parrot the presuppositions that the Watchtower is feeding to them. Because that's the danger, is that you read scripture with presuppositions and you're blind to what the scripture is actually really saying, because you've got
Yeah.
that presupposition drummed into you, you know.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, that was just a couple of things that come to mind to share. But so I was going to talk about one of my experiences on the carts. Um,
Okay.
this was one of the earlier ones in Ayr. Um, no, I'd seen the carters out in there a few times, but hadn't approached, um, because whenever I was with Kathy, she didn't like me approaching them because she didn't like arguments, not like getting into
Yes.
situations.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
occasion when I was on my own, I was walking up Ayr High Street and I saw this elderly couple, older couple, at one point. So I was walking by and I thought, no, I'll stop and talk to them. So I went over, started the conversation, and I thought it was going quite nicely. They worked out who I was, that I was Mario's son, and they were talking to me about my dad, and they were asking about me not coming to the meetings, such like. And anyway, we're talking away, and all of a sudden, this brother, he says to me about not coming to the meetings. He says, "Look, that's because you're not a humble person." And I just looked at him kind of shocked, as if to say that was very, very rude and very tactless. You know, if you're trying to encourage me to just
Yes.
blurt out, you're not a humble person, you know.
Yeah.
But again, this is obviously getting drummed into them that if you're not at the meetings, it's because you're not showing proper
Yeah.
humility
Humility. Yeah.
and, you know, to the bowing down to the governing body. And I said to him, I says, you know, that's really quite cheeky of you to say that. You know, you might think that, but you don't blurt that out to someone so tactlessly like that. But I said to him, I says, well, I'll tell you what, I said, see if I was to come to the meetings, I says, I've got lots of questions. I says, could I come to the meeting and put my hand up and ask some questions? You know, if the brother's saying something or the watchtower, I don't
Yeah.
agree with it, could I question that at the meeting? He said, no, 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 no. He said, that's not the way it works. You know, that's not the way it works. And I said, all right. I says, so basically then the meetings are just indoctrination sessions. You know, it's not there. It's not a study, because all the questions are already written down and all the
Yeah.
answers
All the
are already
answers.
sort of, you know,
Yes.
so you
Yeah.
can't question anything or think of anything yourself to ask. It won't be allowed. So basically, it's an indoctrination session, is what it is. You know, it's not a Bible study. Um, so he said to, look, I'll do you a deal. I'll do you a deal. I says, see if you could show me from scripture. I'd asked them, I said, about the Archangel Michael business. That's one of my favorite ones, an easy one to deal with. And I said to them, can you show me from scripture where it teaches that Jesus is the Archangel Michael? And of course, a
Yeah.
stump. They don't know.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, he did refer me to the book of Daniel, where he talks about Michael being one of the foremost princes. That's what he did. And I said, oh, yeah, that's the scripture that talks about the Archangel Michael. I said, but there's nothing in that scripture that tells you that that's actually Jesus, you know?
Yeah.
And I says, and by the way, it actually says he's one of the foremost princes. So it
Yeah.
suggests that he's not the only archangel.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And he couldn't think of anything else. But I says to him, look, I'll do your deal, a wager. I says, the next time I see you, you go away and have a think about it and get the scriptures that teach that Jesus is the Archangel Michael. And the next time I see you, you can tell me. And then if you can prove to me that I'm wrong, and I says, I'll come back to the meetings. Right? So you go away, you
Yeah.
get those scriptures, you show me where it is, prove me wrong, and I'll start coming back to the meetings because I'm clearly, obviously, got it wrong. Right? Fair enough. Okay, so walks away, and that was the end of that conversation. So it was maybe 3, 4 weeks at least before I was up the town again and saw him. And where they were this time was a different location. But just to put in the pictures, there's a shop that's now derelict. There's no shop premises. There's no business running in it. But there's a sort of an alcove, but there's an entranceway to the shop. And what they do is they set their carts up in this alcove, the entrance to the shop. So they're not actually on the pavement, they're in the alcove and they've got the deck chairs and they've got the cart, they've got the flask. It's like having a picnic. So you could easily walk past that and you'd be buying it before you realise there's anybody
Yeah.
there. So they're going to
Yeah.
sit
Yeah.
there for hours and nobody's going.
Yeah.
Anyway, I saw them and I saw it was him. So I stopped and I says, oh, hello. I says, you remember me? I says, I spoke to you a few weeks back and he was kind of stern faced. He was kind of looking away, looking to the side. I said, I left you with the question about the Archangel Michael. You're going to go away, do some research, and get the answer for me. I said, so how did you get on? Have you got the answer? And still, without really looking at me, he just went, no. I says, what? Did you not research it? He said, no, I didn't. I says, well, I said, if you get me the answer, I'll come back to the meetings. Why did you not research? You told me you were going to do that. He says to me, you're not worth it. I says, excuse me?
Oh,
He said, you're not worth it. You're an
oh,
apostate.
oh,
And
oh.
I said, I haven't actually told you anything of what I believe.
Yeah.
All I've
Yeah.
done is ask you
Ask
to
you a
substantiate,
question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
one of your beliefs, And he says, no, he says, you're not worth it. Um, And I said, well, that's a very, I said, I'm kind of disappointed with that. And disappointed you think I'm not worth it. Why do you not think I'm not worth it? Don't you want to try and help me convince me of the truth? No,
Yeah.
you're just not, you're not worth the bother, you know? And I thought, what an attitude. Um,
Oh,
and then he was saying that, called me an apostate, and I think he says to me, you're an offspring of vipers, right? Because he was going down that route. And then he says to me, go away, just go, you know? And I'm thinking to myself, nah, you can't be ordering people about, how do you think you've got a right to tell me what to do, to order me away? I says, I'm standing on the public pavement,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm in a public space. You can't order me away from the street. If anything, you're on private property, and I bet you
Yeah.
don't have permission from the owners of that building
Yeah.
to actually
Yeah. Yeah.
be. where you're
Yeah, where you
sitting,
are.
you know.
Yeah.
So, but I'm in public, um, so I'm trying to kind of keep the conversation going, and he's obviously at this point he's getting angrier and angrier because he knows himself he should have checked up those scriptures, or he did and couldn't get the answer, and he's embarrassed, so he's getting angry, and then he gets up out of his seat. Now, as you know, I'm a wee tiddly 5'4", and he was about 6'3", quite broad, really well built, and he stands up and he comes right up to me, right up to my chest, and kind of square go, and he intimidating me. He's saying, "Get out of
Wow.
here," you know. And I looked at him. I says, "Seriously, seriously, you squaring up to me, you know,
Wow.
because I'm asking you a question about the Bible and you can't answer it. You're going to square up to me." And at this point, his wife that was there, she starts pulling at his collar, I think, to kind of saying, stop it, and she's going, "He's not worth it. He's not worth it," you know.
Wow.
And yeah, so eventually I kind of walked away at that point. I said to him, yeah, I said to him, he was saying like you're not worth it. You're an apostate. And I said, well, I said, really, I says, Scripture says, judge not lest you be judged. Shouldn't be so judgmental.
Yeah.
Um, have you got the right to decide who's apostate or not? Because I'm not disfellowshipped. I might be soon,
Yeah.
of course. um, you know, as far as they're concerned, we're just lax witnesses, inactive, who've just stopped going to the meetings.
Well,
And if we have questions
to,
and doubts, sorry,
they think we're bitter.
yeah, well, if I'm honest, I would say, yeah, I'm bitter, actually.
Yeah.
Bitter
But
at the
but but
way,
we're yeah, but we're bitter for the right reasons. They think
mm,
we're bitter for the wrong reasons.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
That's the difference.
yeah, yeah. So, I know there's another wee thing I wanted to kind of just quickly share with you. How we doing for
You got
time?
5 minutes. You got
Five
5 minutes.
minutes. All right. Just as a quick
Make it
one
quick.
about it was in Princess Street. Um, that I was speaking to the witnesses. I was coming home one night after work, and I was sitting on the bus, and it comes from the bus station. It comes onto Princess Street. As we're going along Princess Street, stops at the bus stop, and it looks across the road. And again, it's the same situation where it's a shop that's no longer trading. So there's a sort of
Yeah.
a sheltered alcove at the entrance, and there was a couple of witnesses in there. Now, this bit with the alcove is people walking down at Princess Street could quite easily get to that point and not really have noticed them
Yeah.
standing there
Yeah.
until they're kind of
Yeah.
past it. So they're not on the pavement where they could easily be seen. They're in this alcove right at the back. And these two sisters had the two carts and they had them lined up almost like a wall. And these two sisters were standing behind the carts and it was just their heads above the carts. And I'm looking at them from this window on the bus, and I'm thinking, you really don't want to talk to anybody, do you?
No, no, they don't.
You're hiding behind those carts, hoping that folk don't see you. Really um, crazy. It's just and one last thing. Um, Going back to that brother in Ayr, when he's calling me an apostate and telling me to get away, it reminded me of John chapter 20, when it's talking about doubting Thomas. And I think, right, when Thomas turns up late and the apostles say, "You missed Jesus, he was here 10 minutes ago, he's away now." And he's going, "I don't believe that. I need proof that he was here. I need to see
Yeah.
him. I need to see the wounds. I need proof that of what you're saying before I can believe it." The apostles didn't turn round to him and say, "You apostate, get out of here, take it from us." Thomas is saying, I need proof, you know. But they didn't castigate him and throw him out, you apostate, go away. Um, he was provided proof, and then he believed once he was given the proof of the evidence, you know. And it's funny though that the Bible kind of uses that in a bad way, because it goes on to say that blessed are those who can believe without seeing, which is really, that account is actually kind of basically written to say um, that not everybody's going to see Jesus in the first century, but they've got to believe it anyway. Just take it by word of mouth. And I've always thought that's actually not a very. I actually think that that whole passage is contrived. That whole meeting with Thomas, it's a contrived fiction that was written up for the purpose of convincing first century believers to believe without seeing Jesus. It's like the
Mm,
apostles have seen him, and that's enough. And it's a bit
yeah,
like the
good point.
witnesses. If the governing body are saying it, you know, we know best, so you just believe it
Yeah,
anyway, you know.
yeah,
Whereas I'm a doubting Thomas. I want to see the evidence, and I'll believe it when I've seen the evidence, you know.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, that's my thoughts for today.
yeah. In fact, what you're just saying there is what they want you to do is the name of a very famous band, Blind Faith. So there you go.
Blind faith. No, I mean
Yeah.
it's here, I'll throw this in if we've got a quick minute or two. Just have been studying a wee bit on this
You've got
just
2 minutes left. 2 minutes.
2 minutes, right? Doubting
Yes.
Thomas. Thomas probably wasn't his real name. Thomas is the Aramaic, or Toma is the Aramaic meaning twin. And Thomas is also referred to in the scriptures as Didymus, which is the Greek word for twin, right? Um, and Thomas is also known as Judas. There was actually three
Oh,
apostles by the name of Judas. Judas Iscariot, Judas also known as Thaddeus, and Judas Thomas. So they made Judas Iscariot, Thaddeus, and Thomas because there was too many Judases. So he was known as the nickname the twin, right? Thomas means the twin. So he was known in later writings, Acts of Thomas and the Gospel of Thomas, as Didymus Judas Thomas. But whose twin was he? Scholastic thought is that he was Jesus' twin.
oh.
Because Jesus had a brother Judas, Judas the twin. So in the first century, second century writings, the Acts of Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, um, if you look it up, check it up, but there's thinking that he was actually Jesus' twin brother.
Well, a controversial way to end the discussion there.
Yes. Look it
Jesus had
up.
a twin.
Look it up.
Right,
Something to think
okay.
about.
We've literally got less than a minute to say goodbye, so you can now say goodbye, Dino. Goodbye, Dino.
Goodbye, Dino.
And goodbye, Terry. Bye, Terry. So we'll hopefully do another one shortly. I just need to save this. Um, yes. To then just pause. Yes, that's it. Stop recording. Pause recording now.